We're going to have our panel on the digital carbon markets, and I'd like to have Marcus and Drew and Austin and Diana come up. Diana, do you want to introduce this panel and get us moving?
Thank you so much, Dave. I am so excited to have Marcus, Drew, and Austin here. Are we going to share mics?
I think so.
Okay. All right, we'll pass it around. Make sure to logistically. So we are here to explore use cases of digital carbon markets and a report that is coming out in the next week from the working group under BXC, where a lot of you contributed. And we're going to talk about digital solutions and the findings that you've all been really in the works at the forefront of creating the next generation of digital carbon markets. I'm Diana. For those who don't know me, I run research and sustainability at GBBC, and it is a huge pleasure to be with Marcus and Drew. Well, Drew, you guys, Drew, right? Okay, Drew and Austin. I'll let you each introduce yourselves, and then we will get started.
Hey everybody, I'm Marcus. Great to be with you here. I'm a contributor at KlimaDAO, where we're using blockchain technology to solve problems on the demand side of the carbon market, creating increased liquidity and deploying capital to finance new projects all over the world that are using digital MRV and other innovative technology-based approaches to issue and verify carbon credits.
Hey everybody, I'm Drew. So I'm one of the co-founders of KlimaDAO back in the day. Just say this all started for me with blockchain a couple of years ago. I had another company that was doing emissions analysis. Originally, we were looking at the carbon footprint of various blockchains. And from that work, we ended up linking up with others that said, hey, this technology here actually provides a number of interesting solutions in order to link what has historically been quite a fragmented market together. So we came together, as often happens in the DeFi space, and we co-founded KlimaDAO, which was very much an experiment at the time. I think it had quite a big impact. It brought a lot of energy into the space, leveraging blockchain technology. From that, over the years, we took some of the technology, spun it out commercially into Carbonmark, where I'm the director, and essentially we're working to link together various carbon registries while also leveraging the smart contract potential and making these assets programmable on the blockchain in order to build automations around the procurement and the usage of the environmental assets themselves. So pleasure to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Austin Wade-Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Regen Foundation. We're the nonprofit arm of the larger Regen Network, which is an organization that focuses on the origination and innovation of high-integrity eco-credits, which we see as an evolution of biodiversity credits, carbon credits, and the larger crediting marketplace. In the Regen Foundation, more specifically, I oversee a program around governance and ownership at the grassroots level around regenerative communities to maintain, own, and govern Regen Network as a larger project. So my focus is primarily on the role that grassroots stakeholders play in securing and maintaining the overall protocol infrastructure and what that looks like in theoretical and sort of practical terms.
Quick, do we have more mics that we might want to use? Okay, it's okay. We'll pass it around. We'll work with one. So going back to Marcus, we'll start with you and then go to each of you. What got you into carbon markets in the first place? What inspired you about the opportunity you have at hand? And basically, what need did you see that was not being filled? And how are you addressing it now with your use case?
Yeah, so I first heard about KlimaDAO on the Bankless podcast in September of 2021. And I was really excited about the opportunity to apply some of my technical skill sets, my backgrounds in data science and data engineering, to solve problems in the sustainability space. And in particular, I saw that there was a lot of information buried in PDFs, a lot of opaque market information being traded back and forth over email. And KlimaDAO was trying to bring some of that market activity out of the shadows and into the public eye. So I was really excited about the opportunity to surface some of that information. I built a dashboard that showed information about which projects had been brought on chain, how many transactions were being done, how many of those credits were being retired. And this is information that's quite hard to get, quite expensive to get in the traditional market. You're usually paying thousands of dollars a year to a market intelligence provider to get this data. And because these credits had been brought onto a public blockchain, suddenly this data was publicly available, just needed to be put into a user-friendly format. So we built data.klimadao.finance to surface some of this information. And it's been a really useful tool for the on-chain carbon community to see what's been going on. Now, in terms of the problem that we're ultimately trying to solve, Wes demonstrated some of the really cool, innovative approaches that can be used on the supply side for verifying and issuing these credits. But there are also a set of problems on the demand side, where people want to find credits that they're interested in, survey the market, figure out what a good price is, place an order, and then ultimately retire or consume the underlying credit to claim the benefit. And the process for doing that right now in the traditional market is largely driven by phone call, email, PDF, wire transfer. It's a tech stack from the late 90s, hasn't really changed a whole lot in the intervening 30 years. And in our view at KlimaDAO, blockchain technology is the new financial infrastructure that will power this market in the future. But there's an open question about how you transition the existing market infrastructure to this new world. And one of the ways that KlimaDAO set out to do that is by tokenizing some of the existing assets. So we work with a partner called Toucan Protocol and a few other bridges to bring those existing carbon credit assets that were issued through the traditional email PDF process onto a public blockchain, in our case, Polygon. And we use the blockchain's underlying infrastructure, like smart contracts, to create liquidity pools, meaning that if you want to buy a carbon credit, you simply go onto a website, click buy, and you have the asset in your possession, as opposed to having to run around calling people on the phone, sending wire transfers around. This reduces the cost of the transaction down to pennies, from $15 to $100, as well as reduces the time to settle this transaction from weeks or months down to a few seconds, and really unlocks a lot of new opportunities for entrants to come into the market who were otherwise kept out by this complex and opaque infrastructure. So now anybody, any organization who wants to buy and retire carbon can do so in just a few seconds online, the same way that you might go on Amazon and buy a product.
Wow, that is huge. So Drew, I know you were also involved in the early days of KlimaDAO. How did Marcus's story inspire you to get into the space? Where do you see the role of interoperability, technology to improve this market, and what use cases are you seeing? And I know it's a lot, but also where do you also see decarbonization initiatives for the crypto space, for the blockchains themselves?
Yeah, so I mean, Marcus and I journey together started with KlimaDAO. Marcus joined soon after launch. Mine began roughly 8 years ago. During graduate school, I interned for a company called Biocarbon Engineering. They're now called Dendra Systems. So they were leveraging drone platforms to basically measure different ecosystem services that were happening with LiDAR. Eventually, they started to look into the carbon markets themselves. And through that work, I became quite interested. A few years down the line, founded my own company, Offsetra, the one that got involved with emissions analysis. And we wanted to try some innovative means of basically speeding up the time to market for some of these projects, and also automating the processes for purchase and retirement of them. But we found some roadblocks. One, some of the registry infrastructure at the time, I hesitate to call it antiquated, but it didn't necessarily have the API solutions we were looking for to automate some of these processes. And as I said, we linked up with certain groups, co-founded KlimaDAO, and basically, in a research and development sort of fashion, wanted to rebuild some of the tooling for the market processes of procurement and retirement that allowed us to automate those pieces there. Now, fast forwarding a bit then, looking at interoperability and what Carbonmark is doing. So, we truly believe that blockchain itself can serve as that shared infrastructure piece to connect what has been a quite fragmented market together. At the same time, we can use that tooling and then actually automate the processes for people to search for these offsets, to be able to retire them, but also to create some innovative bespoke products. So one of the things you can do with this blockchain tooling when you have an asset that's actually tokenized is you can combine these things and kind of create your own bespoke products. Maybe you want to take something, 60% blue carbon, 40% renewables, just as an example, to create some sort of product there, have people purchase that, retire it, and have that whole process of then taking the underlying assets and retiring it, issuing a retirement certificate, and so on, all take place on chain. The other piece, though, that I think is really important here, because we're all talking about blockchain, is that the interfacing itself to this technology, in some ways, is where the internet was in the 90s. it's difficult. And I think one of the big challenges that KlimaDAO faced in the early days is that you had all of these market participants, that were engaging in, let's say, the traditional VCM, but they couldn't interact with the tooling that we actually built. And that's really the reason for Carbonmark's initial existence. We wanted to abstract away a lot of the underlying blockchain technology to make it easier. So what we've done there is we've created new account frameworks where people can manage the assets without a traditional Web3 wallet. We've also developed an API solution that's completely Web2 based. People don't even know they're interacting with the blockchain, but allows them to then interact with these different products that exist on the blockchain itself. And the other piece I would just say quick is that there are still some major challenges to realizing the full potential of this technology. While we've connected with registries like Eco Registry, ICR, Puro, Regen as well, we still have to figure out the frameworks to interface with some of the heavy hitters in the market, including Gold Standard and Vera. I think they need to figure out a framework that, of course, they're comfortable with. There were some initial working groups on this subject that were productive, but we still have a ways to go. And I think if we're going to unlock that potential, really we need to be able to connect with those places that are facilitating the majority of the liquidity on the market. And once we get in a place there, then we can solve the interfacing issues and get the majority of market participants able to interact with this technology itself. So with that, I'll pass it over. Thanks.
Yeah, Austin, you focus on a different perspective, which is empowering communities and incentivizing, basically rewarding and incentivizing ecological generation. Where do you see the opportunity for customized governance opportunities, especially using decentralization to give more of a voice to underrepresented communities, like in the Global South or certain groups of people?
Yeah, I also kind of want to answer one of the questions that you asked the two of them, so I'll
Sure,
fold it
yeah,
in.
please jump in. And
Because
if any of you want to jump in to the other questions. go
Yeah,
on.
I think I'll speak for myself from Regen Foundation, but I can also speak to an extent about my colleagues in the broader Regen network. I don't think we necessarily approached like the digital carbon market as something that was like appealing or attractive at first, through the different phases of claims around its integrity and challenges in many different directions. I feel like Regen Network as a project has started at a really kind of first principles level to say, okay, there is challenge within the field of climate finance, and yet we all recognize this fundamental need for there to be like a dipolar definition of value. Like it cannot only be extractive value, we must have regenerative value in a way that balances the two out. And it turns out that it's actually quite hard to define that regenerative definition of value, and we've seen that in many different ways. So part of the core premise of Regen Network was to sort of rebuild from the grassroots up a system by which regenerative impact is evaluated or defined as having value. And so we're an application-specific blockchain that runs on the Cosmos network. We have in our architecture a specific program to enable different communities that are directly producing the credits through regenerative actual action, planning, and monitoring to own and govern the network, which seems like a challenge, and it genuinely is. But part of the opportunity that has been introduced in basically giving grassroots communities ownership and governance over the overall protocol is this larger idea around how do the groups on the ground, which are originating and producing this regenerative work, this absolutely essential work, like how do they coordinate and organize internally amongst themselves to define what is a high quality credit according to their bioregion, according to their cultural context, what kinds of like co-benefits seem to be worth including, to begin to define and describe credits that we refer to as eco credits, which are like genuinely high integrity, and the idea being that the successful sale or issuance of those credits does not alienate or dispossess the groups who are responsible for doing the work. So maybe in a scenario in the future where this larger system of digital carbon markets or biodiversity markets or eco credits is successful, is there the social infrastructure in place between communities who are doing this work to not have that new flow of value be fundamentally divisive in and within their context. So at the level of the ground, showing up as an ally and a co-conspirator and listening and learning around the governance processes of the groups who are producing credits is incredibly important for this to actually scale at that level. And so there's lots of different ways that we're developing cool governance processes using token economic stuff and sort of blockchain mechanics on and off chain oracles and things like that I'm happy to go into. But in effect, we're trying to support the signal from the ground to be high integrity and to inform either the marketplaces, policy making area domains, or like the decision making areas in a way that has been very difficult from before. So the signal isn't getting back up to the top. And there's lots of ways for that to happen, and we can bundle those into credits and we can define what a credit looks like. But in the broader question, we need to have durable attestations around what is and isn't working and what people on the ground believe should happen, and allow that to inform this whole process to actually make a feedback loop. And that's a very long project. And so I think just beginning to scope out the challenges of that question is the phase that we're at, let alone just saying, great, we have incredibly emergent and experimental tools in the hands of high vulnerability populations with challenging UI UX. So it's like a long way there, and I think we're trying to frame the question in a meaningful and ethical way.
I think we can all say yes. Wonderful.
Right on.
There is great opportunity, but that does not come without responsibility. And I don't think we can deny that the carbon market space has seen significant challenges with respect to carbon credits potentially not actually having a positive impact on the environment, or carbon credits, once they're used, being sold again. Where's the traceability? How do we know that we're not like recycling the same carbon credit and just making money? So the space has had some growing up to do, and we've taken steps forward. And I'm going to take it to Marcus to tell us, how have you seen the digital carbon markets especially respond to these challenges? And how do you think are the trends moving forward? And how are you especially giving basically taking steps forward with respect to forward financing and the public token governance at KlimaDAO and the solutions that you are building?
Sure. So on one hand, many of the challenges facing the digital carbon market are the same challenges that have faced the traditional carbon market for the last 30 years. Specifically, you mentioned double counting, Diana, and this has historically been a major issue because of the reliance on PDFs as the source of truth. So if you look up a company's corporate sustainability report, often what you'll find on page 45 is a set of PDF certificates issued by a registry like a Vera or a Gold Standard Eco Registry, and those certificates are the canonical proof that that company actually consumed those credits. But there have been incidents in the past of unscrupulous actors reselling those PDFs with modified names. This is one of the problems that blockchain technology seeks out to solve on the demand side, because rather than sharing a PDF document, you're going to share a unique link that is clickable, can be shared on social media, and that link is not manipulatable because of the unique immutability of the data that gets stored on a public blockchain. In order to manipulate that data, you would have to go around to thousands of computers controlled by different people all over the world and somehow change them all at the same time, which is quite difficult to do. So that solves one problem, but it also introduces some other problems. In particular, there are concerns about the energy usage, for instance, of the blockchains themselves. I think this has largely been addressed in recent years. For instance, Ethereum, which is one of the main public blockchains, transitioned its consensus mechanism from proof of work to proof of stake, which reduced the carbon emissions associated with that particular blockchain by about 99.99%. Pretty dramatic improvement, and I think largely dispels the issue. Bitcoin is the one blockchain network that's left that still uses proof of work, and it's not used very much in the sustainability space because of that fact. Now, there are still some remaining challenges around integrity. Wes mentioned some of the challenges associated with integrity in his presentation, and there are solutions for this on the horizon, but ultimately it requires the entire market, whether you're using digital technology or in the traditional market, to come together and define what does a high integrity project look like, and how are we going to effectively audit and monitor projects so that we make sure they are implemented in a high integrity fashion. And one of the big trends in that space is called DMRV, Digital Monitoring, Reporting, and Verification. I mentioned earlier the use of PDFs, wire transfers, emails. In the case of verification, traditional carbon project verification is carried out by a physical consultant being flown out to the project site, usually with a clipboard, tape measure, clicker, this kind of technology, and they write down their findings as they're going around the project site, maybe doing some interviews. If it's an industrial plant, they might look at some gauges and record the values on the gauges, and then they submit a PDF to the registry. And as we saw with The Guardian, this new technology using public ledgers and blockchains unlocks an opportunity to record that data in a publicly auditable way and in a way that cannot be manipulated by an unscrupulous third party. So those problems are being solved, and there's initiatives like the ICVCM that is establishing a foundation for what the basic standard for a high integrity carbon credit looks like, and all of those solutions can be adopted by the digital carbon market. And for instance, at Carbonmark, I know there are plans to add the CCP labeling to the projects listed on that marketplace. Now, at KlimaDAO, the situation we ended up in during our launch in 2021 was that we had a large volume of credits brought on chain, about 5% of the outstanding supply of credits issued by Verra, one of the main carbon credit issuers. And the majority of those credits are what are known as avoidance-based credits, meaning that the projects are going to avoid emitting where otherwise in a status quo situation there would have been emissions. As an example, a renewable energy installation in India, where most of the energy has been generated through coal-fired power plants, when that renewable energy installation comes online, there's a certain amount of coal-fired power that's no longer needed, and that delta between the coal that would have been burned and the coal that isn't going to be burned anymore because of the new renewable energy, that is the carbon avoided. Now, the industry right now is circulating around removals, which is a different mechanism. Instead of avoiding emissions that would have gone up in the first place, you're going to remove emissions that are already up in the atmosphere. A good analogy to think about this is that our atmosphere is a bathtub. It's being filled up with CO2 every day from power plants, from our vehicles, and there's also a stock of CO2 up in the atmosphere, the water already in the bathtub. So avoidances basically turns off the tap or lowers the tap so that less water is flowing into the bathtub. Removals take water out of the bathtub. Now, there's some controversy around this. If you go to a CDR, carbon removal event, you'll hear people talking about removals are the only way forward. In my opinion, we need to do both. We need to both turn down the tap and start bailing water out of the bathtub. And they sort of have different maturities. So avoidance can be done at relatively large scale right now, but there's a fundamental limit because we're emitting about 40 billion tons a year, and if we were to avoid all 40 billion tons, that's it, we're tapped out. Whereas removals have a much higher theoretical upper limit, but today are not really at scale. For comparison's sake, we've done about 2 billion tons of avoidance credits, issued about 2 billion tons of avoidance credits. We've only issued about 1 million tons of removal credits. So there's about a 3 order of magnitude mismatch between the current state of removals and the current state of avoidance. So removals is in this scale-up phase with a very high upper bound. Avoidance is already at scale, but has a theoretical upper limit of the total emissions that we have in the world. So at KlimaDAO, one of the ways that we're navigating this is by deploying our idle capital, our cash, into new carbon projects, the majority of which are removals, while we continue to run the business of providing liquidity and allowing access to the avoidance market that is still the dominant segment of the market today.
That's fantastic. So we know that there's a lot of data that needs to be recorded and verified to ensure trust. And Drew, where do you see the role of common standards, common rules of the game so that we can ensure scalability and trust along the way? And as we develop these new innovative strategies and approaches to bring the digital carbon market space to the next steps, tell us about programmatic retirement and what you are working on.
Absolutely. So there's, I think, 2 pieces to that. One is just the standards of how we're holding the data for these assets on chain. Of course, with blockchains, there are various standards for, say, an NFT or an ERC20 token, et cetera, that set that. So that comes back to the idea of having shared infrastructure that can take in assets from different places in the market and essentially transact them. The other piece there I would say, is around traceability and transparency, which we can all agree are quite critical in this market itself. So Marcus alluded to DMRV, and I think there's some standards building around that. And so I'll illustrate that, kind of showcasing the whole stack here, because I think it helps answer why blockchain in the first place here. So KlimaDAO has deployed capital. It was one of the first off-takers of 1,000 tons from an ocean alkalinity enhancement project by LimeNet in Italy. And one of the really unique things that they're doing there is that they have a sensor system to measure the CO2 concentration in seawater before it goes into their system, where it then encounters a lime material. It becomes calcium bicarbonate. Basically, that CO2 is taken out of the seawater, placed into another substrate where it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and it can be stored for thousands of years. What's unique about their system is that they have sensors at the intake, so that they're measuring the CO2 concentration there, and then after it encounters their solution and goes back into the ocean. Now, they're taking that DMRV data that's live, and they're actually storing that on the Polygon blockchain in a dynamic NFT that's being updated. We're taking that data, and then we're programmatically issuing carbon credits as that data comes in. Now, there are third-party VVBs that are also looking at this, of course, but I think this is a really interesting use case there where you're taking the data, it's on-chain, it is audited by a third party, and then you utilize that to issue the credits themselves. Now, how do we take that to a step further? Well, there are a number of people here that I've talked to already that are doing some really interesting things when it comes to supply chain and doing automated emissions analysis. We actually did a pilot with SAP with a group that was doing automated emissions analysis of supply chain transfers. So you take that data, it's then stored on the blockchain as well, and you can then pair that with these credits that were natively issued on-chain. Now you have a fully traceable chain of custody all the way from the generation of the carbon credit itself, all its associated impacts and so on, all the way to the final retirement of the asset, because that data is also being stored on-chain. Fully transparent, auditable, and so on. I think this is the future that we are working towards. We are taking DMRV data, if it's a nature-based project, maybe drone-based LiDAR, it could be satellite imagery, and so on. You're using that to augment the information that we already have for the classic nature-based project development. You're issuing these assets on-chain, and then through their life cycle and their final use, you have all of that as well. This is really the powerful use case here. But of course, to unlock that, we have to continue developing the tools for the DMRV component and potentially storing all of that data on chain. But you also need to get early in the project lifecycle, connect with those issuers of the credits themselves, whether they be a registry or so on, to have that information essentially. So going back to the standards question, again, big challenge at KlimaDAO. There was nothing on chain for any of this market. We didn't know how you should, basically hold a carbon credit on chain. We didn't know what type of smart contracts we should build to do the carbon retirement, the purchase flows, et cetera. That's being worked out. And over the last 3 years, we've seen some really exciting developments there. We actually have a carbon registry that runs on the Polygon blockchain itself, ICR. You have Eco Registry, they run on a private blockchain, but it's fully interoperable with Polygon, for example. And so as we connect more of these players and we share that infrastructure layer together, we're really going to unlock a tremendous amount of innovation. So the final point on this is maybe some of you have heard of the whole money Legos idea in DeFi. You have interoperability, you have composability. People can take code and other products that they've developed, if they're all built on blockchain, and then build new and exciting things together. This leads to huge network effects in the innovation that we have. And I would argue that really when we're looking at the climate finance industry and climate change, it's really an all hands on deck situation. And we really need to muster every last drop of innovative potential that we have. And blockchain can truly serve as a catalyst to help drive things forward. So with that, hope to speak with many of you about that as we build together, and I'll pass it over. Thanks.
Great. So one thing that fascinates me is how climate issues, and obviously interconnected with carbon markets, are so linked to social issues and the interests of the global south that we're always talking about when we mention economic development and the transition that we're all working toward from an extractive economy that produces a lot of waste ultimately to a more regenerative economy that is more circular in nature. So Austin, how do your solutions, eco credits, in the context of carbon markets and all the innovation that's going on in this space, help us make that transition?
Big question. Okay, so I'm gonna build off of something that I think both Marcus and Drew have said that I think is probably, in my humble opinion, one of the most important takeaways for people who have power and influence to shape the market from today. And I think it builds off this idea of the notion in DeFi around like Lego money, but I think we're extending this idea of composable and modular systems, not just to the level of money, but to the notion of like the contracts that can be constructed, as well as the sort of validation and verification processes by which attestations are made credible or legitimate. So if we can think in a modular and composable way about how we build up claims around things and how they're financed and the contracts that might be driven by them, then we've taken this old school format of like a very long PDF attachment that Marcus is describing, and that Sam and I at Regen Network jokingly call like a proof of work approach in the first place. It's just like the longer the PDF is, the more verifiable the content is. And we're coming up with primitives that are able to like break this down into sub-assemblies that we can then begin to construct up complex arguments and articulations. And maybe some of those form eco credits, but they don't necessarily have to. I think in the process of making this work, we're creating a way to aggregate attestations around environmental impact that can be useful in an incredibly diverse number of ways. And so while the carbon market or digital carbon market in the climate financial sector has a lot going on and a lot of evolution to do, there's still a lot in the space of like impact philanthropy, grants reporting and things like that, where these basic primitives around like the composable nature of verification and validation, or the composable nature of different schemas that might comprise a methodology like Wes was showing, are extremely relevant towards high integrity signal, again, from the ground back up to the policymaker, the grant-making body, the purchaser of the credit, in order to make more informed decisions. And that's like, if the blockchain is like a confidence engine, we can explore its applications to do that across all these different archaic sectors of the climate financial sector. And that's really, really exciting. So I don't necessarily know if there's a solution that eco credits is really proposing, but I think this idea of the Lego bricks and exploring how that plays out across many different domains within the financial sector is incredibly powerful. And I thought the Guardian demo was very elegant in showing how the difference, basically how a methodology is composed of components and subcomponents that are cross-referenceable to one another, and how we're going to do that sort of not just for the creation of these very specific kinds of standards that carbon credits are satisfying, but like how regenerative value moves at all. Because it's just much easier to fine people for polluting than it is to like reward people for doing positive things. And we currently are in a system where maybe one of the largest challenges that I think everyone here is like really committed to taking on is this kind of fundamental incentive problem around validation and verification, where they're incentivized to make it more opaque, more centralized, and basically harder to engage. Like that's the incentive as a business model to do that. So if we are fundamentally trying to make Lego bricks around the notion of schemas and methodologies, the contracts that those might inform, as well as the money and how it moves, that's going right at the heart of a pretty large industry that for some time has a paradoxical incentive to not play along with certain frameworks that would ultimately make it higher integrity, more validation, better verification. So that's the sort of like big response. I'm not sure I answered your question though.
No, that's great. Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So thanks to Drew, Marcus, and Austin. And I hope you continue doing all the wonderful things that you're doing. So we'll move on and take it back to Dave.
Thank you.